Hi, I'm Judith Durham and you're watching Noise 11.
And we welcome into Noise 11 Judith Durham. A pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Paul.
First time we've had you in for an interview, so it's we've got a lot to talk about.
Yes.
You've had a lot of career.
Look, I have. It's true. It's 50 years this year. So 1961 leading up to 2011, and it's really something to celebrate.
Yeah, when you were the chick in the advertising agency back then, huh?
That's right, exactly. I'd been at the Royal Irony Hospital, first of all, and my mother said, you should change your job, you need to earn a little bit more money. So had I known it was going to be advertising, I would have thought, no, I'm not the type. But it was through going there that I met up with Athol Guy on the first day, and we started the Seekers from that.
There's that TV show around at the moment, Mad Men. I don't know if you've seen it or not, which is set in the advertising agency world of the early 60s.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah.
Well, look, it's something that changed my life in many ways. But when I first started singing, of course, it was all the trad jazz dancers around Melbourne, and we all had a great old time.
That's right, and you were pretty much a jazz singer before you became I guess, a pop singer really with the Seekers, although, it's probably, the genre is probably folk, but pop, considering the success, I would have to put it in the pop category.
Yes, well, we were definitely folk, though, when we first started. I'd been a classical musician, first of all, because I learned piano and singing and didn't learn singing, but always sang in classical style music, theatre style. So I thought that was going to be my field. And trad jazz kind of was my rebellious streak that took hold. And, of course, Athol and the boys, Athol, Keith and Bruce, of course, they were singing folk gospel, a little bit of blues and things. So, because that had been quite a fashion, Lonnie Donegan and the Kingston Trio and that sort of stuff. And it was really only through going to England, where we met up with Tom Springfield, that gave us our pop element, because Tom wrote us a song that took us to number one around the world.
Mm-hmm. And he was Dusty Springfield's brother.
Absolutely, and the Springfields, as they were known, a trio, they'd obviously been the outlet for Tom with his songwriting. And so when he wrote for us, because the Springfields had just disbanded, and he produced our record, he had a natural feeling for harmony singing, and of course he wrote those songs especially for my voice. Mm-hmm. And what a thrill to find I'll Never Find Another You now has 4 million hits on YouTube.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Well, so there's a whole new generation discovering the Seekers, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I get so many emails to my website, particularly from America too, which tells us the history of how the Seekers music's been in people's lives for so long, how uplifting it's been for people, joining generations. Yes, it's really, who would have thought that it would last so well, and that nothing would come along to take its place in people's hearts, which is a big thrill for us.
Yeah, because, that first time that you had the big hit, was I'll Never Find Another You the first international hit for you?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
It was the first time an Australian band had hit number one around the world, so we were in the news on the front pages in London. And, yes, it sold, I think, 2 million copies of that single. And that led to then on A World of Our Own, which Tom wrote and produced, and the beautiful Carnival Is Over became our third hit. And by then we'd actually outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And so the following year, the first 6 months, we were the top-selling band.
Right, because that was all happening, that whole, Beatle mania thing was happening at the same time the Seekers were having the hits over there. So I would imagine that you would have come across the Beatles, quite often. You would have met them. Well,
I didn't actually, sadly, I didn't get to meet them. I've certainly been as close to them as I have with you, but I was a bit shy in those days. And, but we've been on the same concerts with them and the Rolling Stones, a couple of those New Musical Express pop concerts. Huge, 10,000 people in the Wembley Arena, in Wembley Stadium, Wembley Arena, I guess it was. Screaming for them, the noise, it's unimaginable. I know anybody who's been to a Beatles concert would know. Of course, when we came on, we had relatively polite screaming, but nothing really, that wasn't our bag, But just to experience those concerts is a huge privilege now, I realise.
Yeah, 10,000 people at a concert in Wembley, that's a complete disaster, isn't it? Because you had 200,000 at the Myer Music Bowl.
Well, absolutely. Let's put it in perspective here, Paul. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the people of Melbourne certainly welcomed us and showed us where we were in their lives. When they all turned up on that day from early dawn and sat through that immense heat, very, very memorable. And they had to stop the traffic down at St Kilda Junction because it was just going to be bedlam. So, there are fantastic helicopter shots taken at like 11 a.m. in the morning, and we still had 4 hours to go.
And still hold the record for the biggest concert ever.
So I believe, yes, in the Southern Hemisphere, absolutely. Yes, and we had a very top-rating television show too at that time, one called The Seekers Down Under, which took you all around Australia and showed what is now, of course, looking back, very low-rise buildings in all the capital cities.
Right, because that 200,000, I think Melbourne at the time had a population of 2 million, so that was roughly 10% of everybody in the city came out to see the Seekers that day.
Yes, incredible, isn't it? They were lining the roadways as we left the airport to come into the city, and it was a huge event. Yeah, really amazing.
Yeah. Now we've got a couple of albums to talk about. One is the new studio album, Epiphany, which is a marvellous piece of new music from Judith, and also there's a bit of history to be told in Colours of My Life.
Yes.
So, we're pretty much covering the entire history. Let's get on to the new record here, because our friend Graham Simpson has actually written with you on here. And there's a great story about one of the songs on here, So Easy to Love.
Absolutely. Well, Graham, he's really surprised himself. All the songs on the album are written really with me mostly, or else collaborating with other experienced songwriters. In Graham's case, he didn't think he was a songwriter, and with So Easy to Love he's really come up with something very special. It was inspired, in fact, when his mother died and his father put a notice in the paper, in the death notices, which was just saying you're so easy to love, and that inspired Graham to write not the lyric only, but also the music too. So I was lucky to be able to collaborate with him on that. Very special moment in the album. But all the songs are very special in their own way, and for me, it's been quite an awareness-raising thing, because some of the songs are based on ideas that other people suggested to me as subject matter for songs. One for women, for instance, one for people who are grieving because they've lost a child who was perhaps stillborn or miscarried, and that level of grief is unexpressed. So these were subjects that I knew nothing about, really, and it's been a learning process for me in the doing, and writing the music too, of course. Very special experience.
That must have been the start of Graham's songwriting career, because he's gone on to get some more credits on the record as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, his starting point, of course, was writing my biography, Colours of My Life. But yes, he's got a tremendous ability with words. I mean, the music, of course, was something very much new to him, but I refer to him a lot with ideas, and he's helped me enormously with getting things in perspective and all that. So indeed he has co-writing credit on several of the songs on the album. I value his thoughts so much, and he's got a very good perspective on my own world, in every sense, whatever I do and whatever I'm interested in. So really I'm very, very grateful to have him. And of course he runs Musicos, which is my company, our production company, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he did a great job on your book, didn't he?
Absolutely. Oh, wow, what a labour of love that was. Yes, and we refer to it quite often, because some of it now I've forgotten my life story, And of course putting together the Colours of My Life album, being the 50-year retrospective, it's been quite an important source of information to remind me when I did what. And one of the things that came to light, which was very unexpected after all these years, was to find that the olive tree, timing-wise, actually followed Georgie Girl. Mm-hmm. And I was quite stunned by that, because Georgie Girl was such a big hit for the Seekers. And, of course, I wasn't leaving the Seekers when I recorded the olive tree. And yet, like a few months after Georgie Girl had reached number one, the very next thing that I was singing on record was the olive tree. Mm. Yeah, what a surprise.
Yeah. Well, Georgie Girl you mentioned there is just like in Australians' memories of famous Australian recordings, it's right up there for most people, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, what a fantastic lyric. And for somebody like me who had low self-esteem, those words are very inspiring for women today, or even men today for that matter. But and in fact, a lot of young boys really like Georgie Girl. It's fascinating. Of course, girls do too. But yeah, the lyric was by Jim Dale, and of course Tom Springfield wrote the music. And it was done for a movie, actually, originally, for the Georgie Girl movie, and therefore it was nominated for an Oscar. But it was beaten that year by Born Free. That was the one that won the Oscar. Yeah.
Now, you left the Seekers in 1968, right at the peak of the Seekers. What was behind that decision?
Well, I'd been with the Seekers 4 years, and of course when we went overseas, none of us had any intention of staying longer than 10 weeks. So it was a sort of an extended working holiday. This is what's so surprising. And I was never quite sure what to do, because I enjoyed all sorts of music. At that time I wasn't a composer, but I still enjoyed singing every type of music and had done all my life. So I did wonder, was I meant to stay in the Seekers, or was I meant to spread my wings and try other things in life, particularly because I still hadn't met Mr. Right, with those three gorgeous hunks sharing the Seekers, but nevertheless, you know, to actually think, well, who am I going to marry? That was a big decision for a girl back in the 60s. You just didn't not get married. And, of course, in leaving the Seekers, that's how I met my husband, and we had the most amazing life together. So, but somehow or other I had to move on, and that was a pretty big thing to decide. It took me, you know, quite a while to make that choice. And I regret to this day that it caused such a lot of grief, and many people are still upset by the fact that the Seekers had to be going separate ways until, in fact, we had our big reunion in the early 90s.
Plans for more?
Well, it is our 50th year next year coming up. So, yeah, I mean, it's my big 50th this year, but next year we're thinking we've got to have a cup of tea or something. So,
well, let's hope it's more than a cup of tea.
Wouldn't that be nice? Well, look, who knows? We don't count on anything, of course, because when you get to our age, you know, I'm 68 this year, and Ethel, what are we, I'm 68, 69. It's Bruce, Keith 70 and Ethel 71. So we're all pushing the limits, you know, to sort of still be able to perform is fantastic. And we think we're the only Seekers group where all four members are still alive and all still concert standard. So it's very, very special. We treasure each other more and more as the years go by.
Yeah, you mentioned finding Mr. Right. That Mr. Right came in the form of Ron Edgeworth, who you were married to for many, many years until we lost Ron in the early 90s. Yeah. But you know, not only did you find Mr. Right, you also found a collaborator. He was a marvellous, talented musician in his own right, wasn't he?
Absolutely incredible. We were brought together because of the Olive Tree, in fact, because the boys weren't singing with me on that. And so Ron came on stage in the concerts with his own trio at that time to accompany me, and that's one solo spot. And his standard, and of course what a likeable person he was, I offered him a job. I guaranteed him 2 months' work to come out to Australia to be my musical director when I was leaving the Seekers. And yeah, we didn't know we were going to write songs together. I just thought I'd have this wonderful pianist and musical director. But in fact, we shared very versatile tastes in all different music. Many songs we did actually write either together, or I put lyrics to his music, or even in several cases he wrote songs himself. And yes, and then of course we had this huge surprise of going back into trad jazz, which both of us had experienced and with a lot of fun back in our teenage years. So we had 9 years in the 70s, and we put our own band together, and 3 of those tracks are on the Colours of My Life album, showing that there are 3 albums that we did during that time. And you can hear Ron's beautiful playing on My Buddy, which is one of the ones from our Newport Jazz Festival appearance.
Yeah, I was unaware that you'd recorded Skyline Pigeon. Not only had recorded this great Elton John song with Elton John.
He was only just starting out in his solo career. So, in fact, Ron pointed him out to me amongst all the musicians in the studio where we were recording in London, and told me that he'd been Reg Dwight and that he was recently in the Melody Maker and he had his own album. So I was the first female artist, in fact, to record one of Elton John's songs. So what a thrill that recently he's given this beautiful quote saying, you know, that I'd recorded one of his songs and how pleased he was with it, because that was my biggest wish, that he would be happy with how the song had turned out. And at the beginning of it, there it is, just solo piano and my voice, and it's me and Elton, so big thrill. Yeah.
And that's for the very first time on CD now, on Colours of My Life.
It is, yes. So I was lucky to be signed to A&M at that time, which of course now is owned by Universal, but back then, I had one album in Los Angeles recorded, and then a second album was recorded in London. And the the arranger of that album, Christopher Gunning, who's an award-winning arranger and conductor now, where he did the music for La Vie en Rose, the Edith Piaf film. But he did all the arrangements, and he booked 2 of his best friends, who were Elton John at the time and Dudley Moore, to perform to be in the band on my album.
Dudley Moore as well?
Yeah, he's on a couple of tracks. So eventually perhaps those albums will be out on CD too, I hope.
Right. But
so far just about 3 tracks from the 2 albums are on the Colours of My Life album.
Is that when you first met Gus Dudgeon?
No, Gus Dudgeon was, golly, you're talking about 50 years here. I've got to put this in little compartments. The early 70s was the A&M albums, and in the mid-90s I recorded with Gus at Abbey Road. We did an album called Mona Lisa's, and that was one. In fact, again, on the Colours of My Life album, there's a lovely arrangement and beautiful production of a song called The End of the World, which was on that particular album. Here in Australia, that album was called Always There. But Gus sadly died not that long after that. And, of course, he'd been a producer of Elton John, as you'd know. And, it brings back such wonderful memories of working with him in the studio. And he put something very special into all those tracks. So aren't I lucky? I mean, I've had so many amazing things happen to me through the 50 years, and that's certainly one of them.
And you're still working with some great songwriters on here. Frank Housen gets a songwriting credit as well.
Absolutely. Well, Frank had written a poem, actually, called Andre, and to my absolute amazement, he got in touch to ask me to set his poem to music. So all I did with that song was literally contribute the music. And when the Seekers were going to be touring with Andre Rieu, I sent it to Andre Rieu, actually. So, guess what? I've just recorded this song called Andre. And to my amazement, he asked, would it be possible to have a revised lyric? And indeed, that's been recorded for his Moonlight Serenade album. So Frank and I are absolutely thrilled, of course, who'd have thought. But I'm very grateful that the opportunity is there for Frank's words to be on the Epiphany album. And I've performed that particular one just with myself playing piano and singing these very, very meaningful, tragic, sad, very, very sad lyrics called Andre.
And Mark Holden, again, is a collaborator with you.
Yeah, golly, Mark and I, he's a very prolific songwriter, wonderful talent, singing-wise too, of course. But we were put together as collaborators back in the 90s, and we ended up with 5 really good songs. So Starting All Over Again has been a song which has been waiting in the wings to have an opportunity to come out. So, of course, it's me and Mark as a duet on that particular album. And the lyric of that song is so full of hope and regeneration. It's just fantastic for it now to be out there and to have an opportunity to appreciate Mark all over again.
I'm jumping from album to album here. I'll just go back to Colours of My Life there for a second. There's so much to talk about.
There is.
Now, on Colours of My Life, there's a song, When Starlight Fades, which is a co-write with your mother.
Oh, Mum, she wasn't a writer or anything like that, but we used to write each other aerograms in those days, the good old air letters. And to my amazement, in one letter, she said, I've just had an idea that you could write a song called When Starlight Fades, the Day Comes In From Somewhere. I thought, Mum, how did you do that? So, yeah, it was not long after I left Australia that the idea, we were back in London, and I've told people many times that I think it's because I had a cup of coffee with caffeine in it, because I was awake all that first night. It was either that or jet lag, but I'm convinced it was the caffeine, because I wrote 2 songs that night, which actually, one was about farewell, which is another song on that album actually called It's Hard to Leave. And the other one, I thought about Mum's lyric, and I thought, I think I can write this song. And I'm so, so glad how it's turned out. I played piano on it too, and Ron wrote the music out with a special arrangement, so I knew which notes would sound the best. And bless Mum, goodness me. So, I'm so proud and thrilled that she's got a co-writing credit on that song.
Yeah. Well, you add up all the records that you've sold over the years. I think the figure I saw was something like 60 million records.
Wow. Well, of course, Judith Durham solo can't take credit for most of those. You can sort of quadruple, double subtract and everything to get to of course, it's the Seekers where my voice has really reached the masses around the world, and even people who don't speak English. It's just astonishing where emails now come from to my website, from absolutely every corner of the globe, people from different age groups. So, it's an absolute thrill that the songs and records are still out there and so timeless that they're still appreciated. And, what an honour to be the ones that those songs, often they were written especially for us. And, fantastic to think new generations are still singing them and will continue to sing them.
Well, one of those songs written especially for you was by Paul Simon. And this was the very first time Paul Simon had ever done anything outside Simon and Garfunkel.
I know. It's astonishing. And he and Bruce, in fact, wrote several songs together. Red Rubber Ball became a very big hit for the Circle, and of course the Seekers had recorded that. But, Bruce had met Paul in New York, I think it was, and we were looking for material in Tom's. We were in Tom Springfield's flat in London, and Bruce invited Paul Simon to come around to the flat because we were all getting together to talk about new material. And I remember he was sitting beside me playing his guitar, and he played us 2 songs, one of which was Someday One Day. We said, yeah, we really liked that one. And then he said, oh, I'd love to play you another song. He said, you can't really have this one, but I'd love to play it to you anyway because it's new. And we're quite cross with the record company because they've tracked strings and drums on it. So we're not really too happy about that because it was meant to be just me and Art. But anyway, here goes. And it was a sound of silence. So I think he's probably changed his thoughts about how effective the strings and drums were now.
Wow, should have got your hands on that one first.
We should have, but no, we made it very clear that wasn't quite available, yes. Yeah. But anyway, Someday One Day was certainly great.
Yeah, well, there's been so much to talk about here. A lot of music out there. Colours of My Life is just part of the new releases. Epiphany, the new Judith Durham album. 50 years of the Seekers coming up next year, and we are going to hold her to more than a cup of tea.
Oh, don't
I think
do
if
that.
If that's as the commitment you can give at the moment, we'll get together for a cup of tea.
2 cups? That'd be great.
Yeah.
Oh, Paul.
Judith Durham, great to have you here at Noise 11.
Thank you. It's been a big thrill to talk to you, and you're so music orientated. It's fantastic to talk on this level. Thank you.